My name is Evelyn Harper, 45 years old, owner of Harper's Delights, a chain of pastry shops that had become something of a landmark in Boston. For 2 decades, I believed I had built not only a thriving business but also a flawless family life with my husband, Nathan. We had weathered storms, or so I thought, and I wore the image of stability like a second skin. But all of that came crashing down in a single afternoon. It began with something so small, yet so devastating. I was cleaning Nathan's car when my hand brushed against a plastic bottle tucked inside the glove compartment. A bottle of lubricant. It was not mine and it did not belong there. My chest tightened, but before I could even process the betrayal that detail implied, a second blow arrived. At the bakery the next morning, an envelope with no return address lay waiting for me. The letter inside was written in a neat but unfamiliar hand, and its words felt like a knife sliding beneath my ribs. Nathan and Clara are planning to take over your company. Clara, my daughter-in-law, the woman I had welcomed into my home, trusted at my table. The words blurred for a moment, but I forced myself to breathe. Pain could wait. What I needed now was clarity. The truth. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories, they're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. Suspicion, I realize, does not explode all at once. It begins like a faint hum beneath the surface of ordinary life. A dissonance that grows louder until you can no longer ignore it. With Nathan, the cracks had been small at first, almost invisible. He came home later than usual, muttering about extended meetings that supposedly dragged into the night. He carried himself with a weariness that did not resemble exhaustion at all but something sharper, something secret. His eyes betrayed him more than anything else, glinting not with fatigue, but with a strange brightness, as though he carried within him a hidden joy I was not allowed to touch. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, but instincts are cruel companions. They whisper truths before we are ready to hear them. One evening as Nathan showered, I found myself holding his phone. My hands trembled, not from fear of being caught but from the dread of what I might uncover. I scrolled quickly and then there it was. A message from a contact saved only as CB. The words were short but merciless. Tonight was perfect, my love. My vision blurred, and my throat tightened as though invisible hands had closed around it. I read the message again and again, hoping my eyes had deceived me. But the initials were undeniable. Clara Bennett. My daughter-in-law. The wife of my son Lucas. The world seemed to tilt violently in that moment. I thought of Lucas. His loyalty, his quiet devotion to Clara, the way he had trusted her with his future. To imagine Nathan, my husband of 20 years, and Clara, the woman I had treated like a daughter, bound together by such treachery. It felt as though my heart had been hurled against stone. Still, some instinct stronger than despair urged me forward. I needed proof. Proof to steady myself against the madness of suspicion. Proof to confront them if it came to that. I took a screenshot of the message, my fingers icy against the screen, and saved it as silently as if I were committing a crime. Then I set the phone back exactly as I had found it. My body was trembling, but my mind was already reaching for the next step. This was not something I could unravel alone. That night, unable to sleep, I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Thomas Reed. He had once been a police officer before leaving the force to work as a private investigator. More importantly, he was an old friend, someone I trusted not only with discretion, but with the painful truth of my suspicions. Evelyn, he said when he answered, his voice low, steady. It's been a while. What's wrong? I hesitated, but then the words tumbled out. I need your help. It's Nathan. And Clara. He didn't interrupt, only listened as I poured the poison into the open air. When I finished, he said simply, let me look into it. Days crawled by, heavy and unbearable. Every time Nathan kissed my cheek or smiled across the dinner table, I felt a hollowness expanding inside me. Clara would stop by with her practiced sweetness, carrying small gifts for Lucas, smiling at me as though her hands were clean. Each encounter gnawed at my sanity. I began to wonder if I had imagined everything, if grief had warped my mind. But then Thomas called. "Evelyn," he said, "I think you should sit down." An envelope arrived later that evening. I carried it into my study and locked the door. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing photographs that stole the breath from my lungs. There was Nathan, his hand entwined with Clara's, both of them entering the gilded doors of a luxury hotel in downtown Boston. Another photo captured them in the lobby, their faces lit with laughter as though they were young lovers drunk on stolen time. The final piece was worse than all the rest. A short video file, grainy but clear enough. Clara leaned close to Nathan, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered something I couldn't hear. He laughed, pulling her against him, their bodies pressed in an embrace that belonged to passion, not pretense. I set the photos down slowly, as though they might burn my hands. My knees weakened beneath me, and for a moment I thought I might collapse. My chest heaved with sobs that refused to surface, the kind that strangle instead of release. Betrayal is not just pain. It is disorientation, a violent shattering of the compass by which you navigate your life. But even as despair clawed at me, another force rose higher: anger. Not the reckless, consuming kind, but something sharper, cleaner. A fire that clarified instead of blurred. They thought I was blind, that my trust was a shield they could exploit. They underestimated me. I gathered the photographs, the video, the evidence Thomas had given me, and pressed them into a folder. My hands no longer shook. If Nathan and Clara wished to weave betrayal into the fabric of my life, then I would not unravel quietly. My grief would not silence me. I was Evelyn Harper, and I would have the truth. Betrayal is one wound. The theft of everything you have worked for is another entirely. Discovering their affair had nearly destroyed me. But when Thomas uncovered their true intentions, the devastation sharpened into fury. Harper's Delights was not just a company. It was my life's work. Every recipe carried the memory of my grandmother's kitchen. Every store carried the weight of years I spent kneading dough at dawn while others still slept. And now Nathan and Clara dared to carve out my legacy for themselves. Thomas's findings chilled me. Nathan had been quietly transferring thousands of dollars from our joint account into a hidden fund. The account was under Clara's name, shielded through layers of paperwork that would have taken me months to untangle without his help. It was not a fling, not a reckless romance. They were strategizing, calculating. Worse still, they intended to manipulate my own son. Lucas, sweet and trusting Lucas, was to be tricked into signing over his shares in the company. My son, whose loyalty was as steady as the morning sun, would unknowingly hand over my life's work to the woman who had stolen my husband. I could no longer afford grief. What I needed now was clarity, precision. I decided to fight fire with fire. The first step was to know more. Knowledge, after all, was the only currency left to me. I installed a tracking application on Nathan's phone, a discreet piece of software that recorded his messages, his calls, every secret he thought was safely hidden from me. First I hesitated, felt invasive, wrong, but then I remembered the photographs, the laughter in that hotel lobby, Clara's hand on Nathan's chest. Whatever moral lines once restrained me had been burned away by their treachery. And soon enough, the app delivered the evidence I dreaded most. One evening, I sat alone in my study, the room dark except for the glow of the screen. I pressed play on a recording, and Clara's voice filled the silence. "Evelyn has no idea," she said, her tone smug, dripping with ambition. "Lucas will sign the papers, and Harper's Delights will be ours." Ours. The word twisted in my gut like a knife. Nathan's voice followed, low and complicit. "Just stay patient. By the end of the month, it'll be done." I stopped the playback and sat frozen in the chair, my blood cold. They were not only conspiring against me, they were mocking me. Clara's words echoed again. A woman younger than me, crueler than I had ever imagined. That old fool. I gathered everything. Photographs, videos, bank transaction copies, voice recordings. I transferred them onto a USB drive, small enough to slip into the pocket of my apron, secure enough to keep hidden beneath a false panel in the bakery's office cabinet. Every day I walked past it, feeling its weight like a secret weapon, knowing that when the moment came I would wield it. The question was not if I would expose them. It was when. The opportunity revealed itself in the shape of a celebration. Lucas's birthday was approaching, and Nathan insisted we host a gathering at the house. Clara, of course, was eager, her smile sweet and venomous as she discussed decorations and menus. I played my part perfectly, nodding, laughing, agreeing, pretending to be the oblivious wife and mother they assumed me to be. Inside, however, my mind was steel. That evening, as guests filled the living room and laughter rose like a tide, I moved among them with practiced ease. I poured champagne, accepted hugs, asked about work and children. No one suspected the storm I carried in my chest. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and I would not falter now. When Lucas stood in the center of the room, smiling at the people who loved him, Nathan raised his glass. "To Lucas," he said, his voice full of pride. "To a son who makes us all proud." Glasses clinked. Cheers echoed. Clara slipped her arm through Lucas's, pressing her cheek against his shoulder, performing the part of the doting wife. And then I pressed the button on my phone. The Bluetooth speaker crackled, and Clara's voice poured into the room. "Evelyn doesn't know anything. Lucas will sign, and the bakery will be ours." The room fell silent as though the air itself had been sucked away. Laughter froze on lips. Glasses hovered midair. Lucas stiffened, his face draining of color. Clara's voice continued, cruel and careless. "That old fool will never see it coming." I watched my son turn toward her, his eyes shattering like glass. "Clara," he whispered, disbelief and heartbreak tangled in his voice. Clara stammered, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Lucas, it's not what you think." But before she could continue, Nathan stepped forward, his own face contorted with panic. "Evelyn, stop this. Let me explain." "Explain." I cut him off, my voice sharp, cold as ice. "Explain how you were going to steal from me? How you betrayed your son. Your wife." I pulled a folder from beneath the table and threw it onto the polished wood. The papers spilled out, copies of the fraudulent transfer forms, the forged documents meant to strip me of everything. "You think I'm a fool, Nathan?" My voice did not waver. "You thought I wouldn't see? That I would just hand over Harper's delights as if it were nothing?" Gasps rippled through the room. Relatives shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between us, between the damning evidence scattered across the table, and the guilty faces of Nathan and Clara. Clara reached for Lucas's hand, but he pulled away as though her touch burned him. His eyes filled with betrayal deeper than mine, because hers was not only the betrayal of a company, but of a marriage. Nathan tried again, desperation in his tone. "Evelyn, please, don't," I said sharply. "Don't you dare insult me further with lies." The silence that followed was suffocating. I could feel every pair of eyes fixed on us, the perfect family unraveling in front of them. But I did not care about the spectacle. What mattered was that the truth had been spoken, the masks ripped away. I looked at Clara, her face pale, her lips trembling. "You wanted Harper's delights? You thought you could steal it from me? You underestimated the woman who built it with her own hands." For the first time since the betrayal began, I felt the weight lift slightly from my chest. Not because the pain was gone, it never truly leaves, but because I had refused to be silenced. And in that moment, as the recording echoed one last time in the stunned quiet, I realized something. They had sought to erase me, to make me powerless. But instead, they had awakened a resolve stronger than anything I had known. I was Evelyn Harper. I was not done fighting. I had exposed their affair and their scheme to steal my company, but something inside me refused to stop there. Betrayal is not only about loss, it is about humiliation, and I knew they deserved to taste the very shame they had forced upon me. The photographs, the recordings, the forged papers, those were weapons of reason. But my heart still burned for something more visceral. Something that would strip away their carefully crafted dignity. The image of that bottle haunted me, the lubricant I had found in Nathan's car, the silent witness to nights that should never have existed. It was small, plastic, unremarkable, yet it held more poison than any blade. That bottle was the proof of intimacy stolen from me, stolen from my son, stolen from everything I thought sacred. And so, I decided it would also become the tool of their undoing. I replaced its contents with something harmless in appearance, but merciless in effect. A tube of industrial-strength adhesive I sometimes used at the bakery to repair broken wood panels and fixtures. It was thick, fast-acting, nearly impossible to separate once it bonded. I poured it carefully into the bottle, sealed it, and set it back where Nathan had always kept it. My hands were steady, my breath controlled. For once my rage served me, not as fire but as precision. But I didn't stop there. I knew Nathan. I knew his patterns, his arrogance. If I were to catch them, I needed certainty. And so I prepared a second trap, a small, almost theatrical device but effective enough. In the kitchen, I set up a pan of oil on the stove, connected to a thin rope that could be tugged from outside the house. A quick pull and the pan would tip, smoke filling the kitchen, triggering panic and attention. Not enough to destroy the house, but more than enough to draw eyes. That night, I told Nathan I had business in New York. A contract meeting, I said, kissing his cheek, smiling as though nothing had changed. He believed me. He always believed me, because his arrogance had blinded him to the truth that I had grown sharper than him. I packed a small bag for show, left the house, and instead of heading to the train station, I crossed the street to the home of Margaret Walsh, my neighbor and closest confidant. Margaret had known me for decades. She had watched Harper's Delights grow from a single shop to a chain, and she had seen the weariness in my eyes long before I admitted it aloud. When I told her what I planned, she did not flinch. "They deserve it," she said simply, pressing my hand. And so we waited. From Margaret's upstairs window, I could see my home, its windows glowing softly in the darkness. My phone buzzed with updates from the surveillance app one had installed. Every sound, every laugh, every word filtered into my ears like poison I willingly swallowed. I sat rigid, staring at the screen, waiting for the moment that would confirm everything I already knew. Morning came gray and brittle, a pale sun struggling to pierce the clouds. And then it happened. A notification lit up my phone. Motion detected in the bedroom. I tapped the screen, and their voices spilled into my ears. Nathan laughed. An easy, familiar laugh I had once loved. And then Clara's voice, soft, playful, dripping with false innocence. My stomach clenched. I could almost see them, their hands entwined, their lips pressed together. And then the moment came. Clara's voice broke the calm, rising into a shriek. "What the hell is this? We're stuck. Oh my God, we're stuck." Nathan cursed, panic rising. "What do you mean stuck? I can't move," she screamed. "Nathan, we're glued. What is this?" The adhesive had done its work. Their bodies, bound together in the most intimate of positions, were now literally inseparable. I felt no pity, only the cold satisfaction of justice delivered. Nathan's voice turned frantic, trembling with fear. Just relax. We'll fix it. There's nothing to fix." Clara wailed. "We can't get apart." I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, and tugged the rope. From across the street, I saw the smoke begin to billow from the kitchen window, thick and black, curling upward like a signal. Within minutes, alarms screamed, and neighbors spilled into their yards. Someone shouted for help. Someone else called the fire department. And then fate twisted the knife deeper, because when the fire truck roared down the street, sirens wailing, it was Lucas, my son, who led the team. My son, the man they had planned to deceive, the man whose loyalty they had poisoned. I watched from Margaret's window, my breath shallow, as Lucas jumped from the truck, shouting orders, his voice strong, urgent. He smashed through the door, leading his men inside. For a moment, silence. And then a cry so raw, so broken it made my hands shake. "Why?" Lucas's voice thundered from the speakers in my ears, captured by the app. "Why, Dad? Why, Clara?" Neighbors murmured, their voices carrying on the street. Windows opened, cameras lifted. And then the final act. Nathan and Clara, dragged from the house on stretchers, their bodies still bound together by the glue, wrapped in blankets to hide their shame, but not enough to conceal the truth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some covered their mouths, others whispered harshly. I heard words like disgusting, shameful, betrayal. The crowd's judgment was a storm, and they had no shelter. And then Margaret, my steadfast witness, lifted her phone and recorded it all. The firefighters, the neighbors, the broken man who was my son, the humiliated pair who had once thought themselves cleverer than me. I watched as Nathan's eyes darted wildly, searching for me in the crowd, but I was not there. I was hidden, safe, listening, seeing, documenting. Clara sobbed, her face twisted with humiliation. And Lucas, oh my son. His shoulders shook with rage, his fists clenched at his sides. His world had collapsed just as mine had. Yet in that collapse I knew he saw the truth. He saw what they were, and he would never forgive them. The fire was put out quickly, the smoke dispersing, but the damage was already done. Not to my house. It had only suffered minor burns. The real ruin was their dignity, their reputations, and they could never rebuild what I had destroyed. When the ambulances finally pulled away, carrying Nathan and Clara to the hospital still bound together, the neighborhood remained abuzz. Margaret squeezed my hand. "You've done it," she whispered. "They'll never recover from this." And I nodded, though my chest felt hollow. Revenge is not sweet. It is bitter, searing, heavy. But it is also necessary. For once, Nathan and Clara could not hide. They were exposed, not by rumor or suspicion, but by truth, raw and undeniable. And I, Evelyn Harper, had ensured it. But the story didn't end with that public humiliation. The fallout would echo through every corner of our lives. My son would face choices no child should ever confront. My company would need protection stronger than ever. And I would have to live with what I had done, with the knowledge that justice had come not from the courts or from reason, but from my own hand. And yet, as I sat in Margaret's living room, watching the neighborhood buzz with scandal, I felt no regret. Only a fierce clarity. They had underestimated me. They had thought I was weak, blind, soft. But I had proven them wrong. I was Evelyn Harper. I was the woman they tried to erase. And now the whole world knew exactly who they were. At the hospital, I continued with my plan. My hands trembled slightly as I held the small container, but my heart remained steady. For weeks I had rehearsed this moment in my mind, imagining every possible reaction, every scream, every tear. The sterile smell of disinfectant lingered in the hallway as I walked quietly toward their room. Lucas was asleep after a long night, his face pale but peaceful. Nathan and Clara, however, were still recovering from the burns on their skin, burns that should have healed more quickly if not for what I had done. I had switched out their soothing skin ointment for sharp, burning mustard paste. I knew exactly what it would do. Sting like fire, sear the skin, leave them writhing in agony. And when their cries filled the sterile white room, I did not flinch. I stood outside for a moment listening. Their screams were sharp, almost animalistic, a mixture of pain and shock. Clara clutched her arms, her voice shrill, while Nathan groaned through clenched teeth, cursing under his breath. The nurses rushed in, confused, checking the labels, unable to understand what had gone wrong. And I waited until the moment felt right. Then I stepped inside. The weight of the divorce papers felt heavy in my hands, heavier than any tray of bread I had ever carried at the bakery. My footsteps echoed softly against the tiled floor, each one cutting through the chaos of their pain. I walked to the center of the room, my eyes calm, my back straight. I placed the documents on the bedside table, right between them, the sound of the folder snapping against the wood as sharp as a gavel in court. "Sign it, Nathan," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "And Clara, get out of Lucas's life." For a moment, silence cut through the room. The only sounds were the beeping machines and their ragged breathing. Clara's tear-streaked face turned toward me. She shook her head violently, her messy hair sticking to her cheeks. "Please, please don't do this," she begged, her voice breaking. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. We didn't mean to." But her words crumbled under the weight of my stare. I did not need to shout. I did not need to explain. The betrayal they had committed spoke louder than anything I could ever say. Nathan's face was stone cold. He glanced at Clara, then at me, his jaw tightening. For once, he had nothing clever to say, no excuse, no sweet lies to cover the bitterness of his actions. Clara reached out toward Lucas, who had stirred awake, confusion clouding his eyes. She sobbed, her voice rising into hysteria. "Lucas, you know me. You know I care about you. Please don't look at me like that. Please say something." But Lucas didn't answer. He sat up slowly, his eyes fixed on her with a piercing coldness I had never seen in him before. There was no anger, no shouting, just a hollow finality, a wall she would never climb again. He looked at her as if she were already gone. Then, without a single word, he pushed himself out of the bed, steady despite the pain still evident in his body. He passed by her, by Nathan, by me, and walked straight out the door. In that instant I understood. Sometimes silence wounds more than words ever could. Clara collapsed into herself, wailing, but I no longer cared. Nathan's signature scratched across the page with a furious flick of his hand, the ink bleeding slightly into the paper. And just like that, the life I had once built with him was officially over. That day I lost a husband, but in exchange I kept Harper's delights, and I kept Lucas. Life after that moment did not come with a rush of triumph. It came quietly in slow steps, like dough rising patiently before the oven heat. The bakery, once trembling on the edge of collapse, began to bloom again. Perhaps people sensed my story in the air, in the sweetness of the cinnamon rolls, in the way I arranged the fresh croissants in the window. Customers returned and new ones discovered us. Lines began to form in the mornings, stretching out onto the sidewalk, the scent of butter and sugar drawing them in. Lucas was by my side every day. We worked together as if nothing had ever tried to break us apart. He kneaded dough with strong, steady hands, wiped flour off his brow, and delivered boxes of pastries with quiet efficiency. He spoke less than before, but I didn't mind. His silence was no longer heavy. It was steady, grounding, a presence that reminded me I wasn't alone. Sometimes, in the hum of the oven and the clatter of trays, our eyes would meet briefly, and I would know we would endure. Outside of the bakery, I began to rebuild myself. I joined a cooking club at the community center, surrounded by women and men who laughed easily, who shared recipes and stories without judgment. I found joy in the smallest details. The smell of fresh herbs, the crackle of bread crust, the simple act of brewing tea in my favorite cup. My hands, once trembling with anger, found steadiness in creating again. The neighbors began to notice. They saw me walking down the street with flour-dusted clothes, a smile that wasn't forced, a posture that carried no shame. They called me strong. They called me brave. The strong woman on Maple Street, one of them whispered fondly. But I knew the truth. My strength did not come from being unbroken. It came from the fragments, shards of a heart that had once been shattered, now pieced together in a new form. Every time I looked at Harper's delights, bustling with life, I remembered what it had cost me. Pain, betrayal, nights spent crying alone in the dark. But I also remembered what it had given me. Resilience, clarity, a future that was mine to shape. Strength, I realized, wasn't about never falling apart. It was about what you built from the pieces. And so, day by day, I began again. When I look back at everything I went through, the betrayal, the pain, the nights when I thought I would never stand up again, I realize it all gave me lessons I could not have learned any other way. And today, I want to share them with you. Because maybe my story can light a small candle in someone else's darkness. Lesson 1. Never let betrayal define you. Someone else's lies or disloyalty may wound you, but it should never decide your worth. I learned that my value wasn't tied to Nathan's choices, but to the way I chose to rise afterward. Lesson 2. Protect what you love fiercely. For me, it was Harper's delights, my bakery, my dream, my identity. Life will test you, people may try to take it away, but the things closest to your heart are worth fighting for. Lesson 3. Strength isn't loud, it's steady. I used to think being strong meant never crying, never showing pain. Now I know true strength is continuing each day, even when your heart feels broken. It's in the quiet decision to keep going. Lesson 4. Healing is found in small joys. Joining a cooking club, painting my walls, sipping coffee from a cup I chose myself. These weren't grand victories, but they reminded me that life is still beautiful, even in the smallest details. Lesson 5. You are more powerful than you think. When my neighbors called me the strong woman on Maple Street, I finally believed it. Because strength isn't given to you. It's forged from everything you survive. And so to anyone listening, whatever storm you are in, know that you can stand again. You can rebuild and you can find joy where you thought there was only pain. If my story touched you, if these lessons spoke to your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world, and together, we can keep telling stories that remind us all. We are stronger than we imagine.